Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Should I really give it a yell or what? Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I hope everyone's had a chance to get their breakfast and coffee, and we're going to start our program this morning. My name is Lisa Bates. I'm a faculty member here at the Toulon School of Urban Studies and Planning, and part of our research group, Planning Oregon, who is hosting this morning's forum. I think everyone in this room knows what a hot topic and really critical issue for our region housing is. And it's really great to see such a wonderful breadth of folks from different sectors, from private development, from the nonprofit world, from our government planning side, and participants, from Clark County down to Milwaukee to Hillsborough, and from here in the city of Portland. We are really excited about today's event here at Portland State. And yes, we've got a keynote, we've got panelists, but really the meat of our day, the heart of our day is your participation and dialogue with one another across perspectives with problem solving in mind. So we're really excited to spend this half a day with you. I'm going to now turn over our program. It'll introduce our Portland State University President, Wim Vivo.
Thank you, Lisa. I'd like to start on a somber note. We know that there is bad stuff that happens all over the world at all times. Some of it very visible, some of it far removed from us. But when it hits close, like the shootings at Umpqua Community College yesterday, I think it calls out to us for special attention. Academic institutions should be places of safe harbor, places where people can pursue their hopes and their dreams, and to have them shattered the way they were yesterday just shouts out and makes us wonder, what can we do? Right now, all we can do, and I'll ask you to join me in a moment of silence to remember those whose lives were so rudely broken up. Thank you. One of the things we do, regardless of whatever political persuasion you may have or particular policy measures you may promote, one of the things we do is do the work, right? Do our work to try to shape the environment that we live in and to make it a place where as many people as possible can succeed. And Oregon and Portland, of course, have long had a great reputation for being very proactive in shaping the environment, both the social environment, the natural environment, and the physical environment. And I know that's what we're here to talk about, and that's what Planning Oregon, as an effort to call together people, to have dialogue and talk with each other about problems and solutions, is all about. Now, I have to tell you, I come to this challenge of planning with a very, very high set of expectations. I spent 25 years at the School of Urban Planning and Policy in Chicago, and there in our curriculum and in general, we always looked at Oregon and Maryland as sort of the two states in the nation that were most advanced in planning. So I did spend 4 years in Maryland, in Baltimore, and I sort of found out that while there's a lot of stuff that's pretty good, it isn't all what it's cracked up to be. So then I came to Oregon 7 years ago, and I still remember the first time that we drove out to the wine country on 99 West. And I thought, God, I heard about this growth boundary. And you drive through Tualatin and Wilsonville and all that, and it sort of just goes on and on and on with gas station and furniture store and fast food store. And I felt, man, you could get that anywhere in Illinois. So I realized here too, not everything is as it's cracked up to be. Now, in fact, my standard is even higher because, of course, I grew up and did my academic studies in the Netherlands. And you haven't seen an urban growth boundary until you've been in Amsterdam or Utrecht or Haarlem or any of the Dutch cities, and you've seen that line between the 12-story apartment building on one side of a little canal and the cows grazing on the other side of the little canal. Now that's an urban growth boundary. That's a hard stop. We ain't seen nothing yet here. There's a lot of work to be done, a lot of work to be done. And it's fascinating to think about how to do that work in a climate that's very different. Again, when we explain Dutch planning, we start back in the 13th century. You know, we talk about the need collectively to take care of the water. Because if you don't take care of the water in the Netherlands, you don't have any land to live on or to grow anything on. So it required collective action, collective responsibility, an awareness that you can't have individual rights that supersede collective responsibilities. So it only took perhaps about 700 years to get it right. So we've only just begun. So don't give up hope. Just have a very long time horizon. And what institution better to have a long time horizon than a university? You all know this story about that of the 100 institutions in the world that have been around for more than 500 years, 50 of them are universities. Portland State has only been around for 69 years. So again, we've only just begun. And you're here to make it happen, collectively, to think about what are the challenges, what can we do, what are the solutions, what is being tried elsewhere, and how can we move forward. I'm very glad that you are here, that you're working with our university, with our College of Urban and Public Affairs, because I think if there's one thing that we do well in Portland and Oregon is to convene and to talk. Now let's hope that we can go beyond just talking and admiring the problem, but begin to get together and talk about the solutions. Thank you all very much and have a great day. And unfortunately, I have to leave you to go to another meeting, as university presidents always do, but I know you'll have a great time. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Stephen Percy. I'm the Dean of the College of Urban and Public Affairs, and we're just delighted to have all of you here today. When we looked over the list today, we saw we had tremendously diverse representation. We have civic, corporate, governmental, nonprofit, students, faculty, and many others here joining us for this very important conversation. So welcome. We're so delighted. This kind of event is what the College of Urban Affairs is really about, bringing people together, bringing diverse people into conversations, infusing knowledge, identifying new research imperatives, convening people for conversation, creating new ideas, and hopefully supporting the positive continued growth and development and life quality here in Greater Portland. This conference is so exciting to me today because I just got back from Toronto, where I was with the Best Practices trip, and my colleague Joe Zender from the City Planner was there with us in Toronto, and we were in a place of tremendously rapid growth, huge growth over the last 25 years, and expected growth of 120,000 new people a year into a metropolitan area, a region that's grown to 6 million people. And we began to learn a lot of the different problems. We had a chance to meet with Richard Florida. I'm sure you've heard of the author of Creative Class and many other conversations. And kind of the conversation and the argument he makes is the urban form is fundamentally changing again. It's never totally stable, of course. But where in the past we had gone through a massive period of suburbanization as we grew our middle class in the post-World War II period, where we had industrial growth and a lot of things that led to a suburban growth pattern, that's all changing and it's reverting back to the city core. So that leaves us to think about a lot of things about how our cities are going to grow, and they're going to grow. It's going to be how are we going to adapt and plan for that, and that's just the great purpose of this conference today. How are we going to deal with infrastructure? How are we going to deal with housing and housing affordability and different types of housing to mix needs? How do we reserve land for commercial and industrial purposes? How do we build our transportation system to be strong? All these different things are very important, and it was interesting to see a high growth place that showed wonderful new high-rise buildings popping up all along, lots of excitement, a lot of energy, tremendous diversity, a city that welcomes immigration, and yet a city whose commute time is averaged 82 minutes to work and back. So this is a great opportunity. We're going to need to be thinking about the future of Greater Portland, and we're glad to have this important conversation. It's one of the elements that can hopefully go into thinking about that. I want to thank some people who were very helpful in putting this together. This event today, I want to thank Lisa Moorhead, Matthew Gephardt, Lisa Bates, and Kevin Posey for all the background, getting everything organized, helping to create a great program, and then getting all the events scheduled. I also want to thank the people here who were associated with our Oregon Planning Forum, a new effort to sort of help us to do community engagement more with some planning and urban planning that relates to, and land use planning as it relates to Oregon and Portland. And I want to thank Matthew Gephardt, Ethan Seltzer, Cy Adler, and Connie Ozawa for the work in that. So we're really trying to gear up to be a partner in these conversations about the future of Oregon. And I want to thank one other person. That's my colleague, Jim Irvine, who's going to speak next. And Jim has become so important. He was very instrumental in today helping us raise funding for the event, helping us identify folks to invite, and doing so many things. Jim has become so important to the College of Urban Affairs that a couple months ago I named him the Senior Fellow of the College of Urban and Public Affairs. So it's my pleasure to introduce Senior Fellow Jim Irvine.
Good morning. I think I need to also thank some people that made this event really happen. So just a quick thank you to Stuart Title and Northwest Natural Gas and Val Farthington Companies. And a special thanks to the Department of Land Conservation and Development. And then I need to mention the Home Builders Association. A little bit of it was their inspiration, but more important, their willingness to give up doing something that they thought might make a difference, but turn it over to an institution that was a safe place to have a dialogue, a real dialogue about our future, the challenges that we have with respect to housing. And so I just want to thank them for turning that over and having trust in the university system to be able to bring this to you today. We talk about conflict, we see it. Don't worry about it. It's natural. Part of our legacy are three mountains: Mount Hood, Mount Adams, and Mount St. Helens. They're all part of our scenery. Wallace Stegner, in his book, The Sound of Mountain Music, said, "One cannot be pessimistic about Oregon. This is the native home of hope. When it finally learns that cooperation, not rugged individualism, is the quality that most characterizes and preserves it, then it will have achieved itself and outlived its origins. Then it has a chance to create a society to match its scenery." So yes, there is conflict in our history. There is conflict in our individualism. But there's also innovation and cooperation, and that's a moment in time today. We have, if we go to any building here at the university or downtown, or go out to Mount Tabor or the west side, you look south and you see the convergence of three rivers. You look north and you see the Great Plains of the Columbia River coming down and providing opportunity. You look east, you look to the vista of Mount Hood, and all the canopy of trees that we see across this city. And you look west, you see the plain of the beginning of what is that great Willamette Valley, where it's habitated by people and also agriculture and forestry. Natural conflicts occur on a regular basis. The quick story of the native Indian lore about Mount Hood is very simple. Wyeast and Klickitat, two great warriors, decided to fight over the great Indian princess Luwit. And that fight brought along a lot of forest fires, volcanic eruptions, and a variety of things geologically that gave us what we have in scenery today. So those fights gave us the beauty and the scenery that we see. Today, you are individually invited here to participate. You're the soul of what is happening today in this conference. We have been very inclusive in terms of, if you go down and look at the invitees, the sectors that are represented. We've tried to stretch across those sectors of government, neighborhoods, community interests, and development and business. So you are representing that very inclusive community. But we've been exclusive because we're depending on you. We're depending on you to participate in these breakout sessions when they come about and really get down to a dialogue that we can look at and learn from each other. In staging that, I want to introduce our keynote speaker. Chris is an unbelievable Renaissance man. He started here at Portland State in his academic career. After graduating from the graduate school in urban planning and urban studies, he decided to go out and be a fiscal officer down in Marion County, and he immediately became bored. Just said, there's really no activity balancing budgets across the line. So he said, I've got a master's in urban planning, maybe I'll go try and be a planner somewhere. And he ventured off into Columbia County to become a planner. Then there was the 1980s recession, and he said, gee, I'm going to take the opportunity to go back to the university and get my PhD, what he did. He finished his graduate studies. So he had experience in budget control and management, in planning in a county, in academics, but he hadn't yet ventured out into the real world of entrepreneurship. So he started a consulting business. And he consulted, and he's actually taken cities and counties to court over land use matters, fiscal matters, and a variety of other matters as it relates to representing the development community. So from a Renaissance perspective, Chris has it all. He's going to be here today to talk about where we are tomorrow and what's working, what's happening, what are those trends? In those trends, what are the challenges? Where is the conflict as we revitalize America in the 21st century? Bruce Katz actually talked about Chris in his latest work, that Chris is not only a Renaissance individual, but he had the capacity to look intuitively about what was happening demographically, apply it to the development interests, apply it to how a change, and see, is there a path to revitalize urban communities? It is with great pleasure for us to have our own alum, a true individual who is now Associate Dean down at the University of Arizona, an individual who can let us be challenged by what he's going to share, Dr. Chris Nelson. Chris?
Thank you, Jim. I've been called a lot of things in my life, but never a Renaissance man. Uh-oh. I just knew I'd mess up. I need help. Oh, here we go. Okay. Well, Jim says I'm going to have some answers. No, I'm not going to have any answers, not to this crowd anyway. I'm going to take us through the past and the present and the future in the U.S. and in Oregon, and especially in the metropolitan Portland area. Yes, I do a fair amount of academic work, I do a fair amount of observations. I do a lot of traveling around the country. I talk to a lot of people, especially the development community and public officials and so forth. And I try to figure out what's going on, where we are headed. We've got a pretty good idea where we've been, most of us anyway, but where are we headed? So I do write books, publish or perish, and so at least I'm not perishing yet. I have a few books out. But from these books, I'm going to paint a picture about where we're headed in this country, in the state, and in this metropolitan area in ways that we need to recast our thinking about planning, policy, even each other. I'll talk about population trends, household trends, home ownership trends, but I'll give no answers. I'm not so sure this is the forum for answers, but this is the forum for raising the questions. Of course, we have new realities going on. We have, the days of the subprime mortgages are gone, causing in part the Great Recession, the crash, and everything else. Now we're seeing a new kind of world order in the field of housing, where the 20% down payment is becoming more and more expected. Yes, there are some 5% and 3% down payments, but those days are largely winding down, and I'll show you numbers that indicate that it's winding down in ways that will vastly recast our housing markets. The bottom line is that I think we're entering an era where we'll have fewer homes being built, homes on smaller lots, attached homes, and maybe more people living in each unit. And I'm already seeing those trends nationally. But let's look at what's going on globally in terms of the population. The U.S. is going to grow between 2015 and 2040. We all know that. Oregon will grow about the same pace. But this metropolitan Portland area, and when I say metro, I don't mean the council area. I mean the three main counties here, Multnomah, Clackamas, and Washington. By the way, I've lived in all three counties in my past. I don't include that other county across the Columbia River they think it is. No, we're talking about the Oregon side of the vast Portland metropolitan area. This area is going to grow considerably faster than the nation as a whole, and you all know that. But I think you need to put this into perspective. Now, one of the things I look at is the extent to which population is aging around the country. I'm a baby boomer. A lot of us in this room are baby boomers. We are the big pig in the python, and as we move through the middle of this century, we'll vastly change the social service network, the fiscal network, the land use network, and so forth. So for the nation as a whole, if you took the change in population, total population, those turning 65 or those becoming 65 will be equivalent to 44% of the growth. In Oregon, that'll be about the same as well. But metropolitan Portland is attracting a younger population. And so we are not going to be becoming as aged as quickly as the rest of the country or even the state of Oregon. But something else is happening too. We are becoming a lot more diverse. Now, the census says by about 2040 or thereabouts, the U.S. will become a nation mostly of minorities. They call it majority-minority. My head hurts when I think majority-minority. It doesn't mean much to me. But we're headed towards a time where we are going to see a new majority emerge. And so America in 2040 or thereabouts will have a new majority population. And so I use that term in my writings these days. And so we're going to see for the U.S. as a whole that 91% of the net change in population between 2015, this year, and 2040, 25 years from now, will be new majority growth. Everybody but white non-Hispanics. Oregon will basically follow that trend at a slightly lesser pace, but metropolitan Portland, all of the growth, equivalent to all of the growth here, will be new majority growth. So let's look about how our housing markets are shifting in maybe ways that are subtle, maybe glacial, but inevitable. What I show here now is a chart you developed and show around the country at engagements like this. I divide the housing market crudely into 3 age categories. The starter home market comprised of households with householders under 35 years of age. These are apartment, small lot, small home, condo, townhouse, demand households. Then we have the peak housing demand group, those between 35 and 64. They have families. One or both parents or partners work, so they have the income. They need space, they want space, and they can oftentimes get the space they want. Then we have the downsizing households, those over 65. They're empty nesters. Maybe the lot and the house is too big. They want to go to something smaller. So these are 3 very discrete markets in our housing system. Between 1990 and 2010, that 20-year period, we saw a decline nationally in the starter home household market. Think about that. We had negative growth in the starter household market. That is why the apartment industry fell on hard times, in part. Between 1990 and 2010, that's when the boomers came into their own with families to raise, and they needed space, and they got the space. 82% of the net change in demand for housing was attributable to the baby boomers having families, having incomes, and needing the space to raise them. Well, what's interesting is that between 1989 and 2009, roughly the same 20 years, 85% of the nation's new housing built was single-family detached homes. Demand, supply. We did pretty good. Pretty good match. The downsizing households during this 20-year period were about, the rest, about a quarter of the demand. Now we fast forward to a period between 2010 and 2030. Now I'll show you these numbers now because I'm going to show you then updated numbers going out to 2040. But look what's happening between 2010 and 2030. 74% of the net change in housing demand will be attributable to downsizing households. So keep this in mind as we go forward now to the next couple slides. So you're the first people on the planet to see this update. I'm now doing 25-year chunks, so I'm doing 1990 to 2015 this year, and 2015 to 2040 to get a different kind of sweep of what's going on. So for the U.S., the numbers are pretty much what I showed you on the earlier slide. And Oregon is following the U.S. But look at the metropolitan Portland area. Between 1990 and 2015, about 70% of the net change in demand for housing was attributable to baby boomers needing to have housing to raise their families. That will fall to a quarter, from 70% roughly to a quarter, between 2015 and 2040. Vastly different kind of housing demand. The demand for downsizing households will double from about a quarter to nearly 50% between 2015 and 2040. Now, we're going to do okay, as an aside here, in this metropolitan area, but there are many metropolitan areas in this country, Cleveland, Kansas City, St. Louis, you can just sort of name them, where we're going to see more boomers trying to sell their homes after 2020 than there are people wanting to buy those homes. Keep that in your mind because we'll talk about that momentarily. Here's a graphic showing the same thing. The gray numbers, the gray bars are 1990, 2015, and the reds are 2015, 2040. Look at the drop-off in terms of demand for the peak housing demand households and the doubling, roughly, of the downsizing household demand. That's going to dramatically change the housing market in this metropolitan area. Something else is going on, too. Home ownership is declining. We all kind of heard this and seen the numbers sometimes, but I'm not so sure that we really fathom what that means to the housing market. So here's a chart showing home ownership between 1965 up to 2015. And I show the baby boom-driven, peak-driven part of that market during the middle 1990s through the 2015. Notice that we hit a peak, of course, about 2005. About 69% of all households in the U.S. owned their home, and then we had this drop-off. Now, in 2005, where this peak occurred, we were living in Alexandria, Virginia. I was working at Virginia Tech then. And my wife and I got a note in the mail addressed to our cat, Valentine Nelson, from a bank. The bank was telling Valentine Nelson, our cat, that she qualified for a $500,000 loan for better terms than we had. All she had to do was sign, or maybe paw print, the form and send it back in to get the voucher. Well, she didn't sign the form, and the market crashed. So where are we headed with this downward trend in home ownership? Now, there's lots of reasons for the downward trend, and I'm not sure I have the time to go into all those reasons here today, but they're happening. So the Urban Institute projects that by 2030 in the U.S. as a whole, the home ownership rate will have fallen to 61.2%. Now, I'll show you momentarily what that means in terms of the next wave of housing demand. But for right now, people like Ben Bernanke can't get a loan. Ben Bernanke and I share a lot of things. Not that we're friends, we have a beard. We're kind of thin on the top. We're about the same age, and we can't get a loan. Now, when I moved from Salt Lake City, where I was at the University of Utah, to Tucson, I left employment in Salt Lake City on May 15. I'm starting my new job on August 15. We're buying a house in Tucson, closing on May 20. I'm putting 80% down, 80% down on our home. I have an 800 credit score, thank you very much. And the bank says, Dr. Nelson, we can't give you a loan. You don't have a job. Wait a minute, I've got this paper signed by the university president saying, I'm starting a job August 15. Oh, Dr. Nelson, we can't accept that anymore. Maybe in the old days we could accept that, but because you haven't got a job, you can't get a loan. Same with Ben Bernanke. When he left the Federal Reserve Board, he was unemployed. This is where we're headed now. This is where we are now in terms of home ownership. High down payments. You have to be employed. That's a good thing, I guess. But the standards are so high now that fewer and fewer and fewer people can qualify for homes. So what does that mean, really? This chart has a lot of numbers on it. I'll just focus on a couple main numbers. I tell my students when you build charts, be very careful about the numbers. So I highlighted numbers here in basically between 2005 and 2014. For the U.S. as a whole, the entire change, the entire net growth in housing demand was attributable to renters. In 2014, we had fewer homeowners in this country than in 2005. In metropolitan Portland, it was 71%. In other words, 71% of the net change in demand for housing in Metro Portland between 2005 and 2014 were for renter housing. That is changing our landscape considerably. This chart illustrates what's going on here. Well, where does this take us? Between 2015 or 2014 on my numbers and 2040, nationally, in Oregon and in metropolitan Portland, more than half of the net change in demand for housing will be for renter housing. This is the brand new world of housing we're facing. Now, it's not that we're going to build apartment housing to meet the demand. What's going to happen is that many millions of homes nationally, tens of thousands of homes in metropolitan Portland, will move from being owner-occupied to renter-occupied. That is the new world order, at least in the US, Oregon, and Portland. We need to come to grips with this change. At the same time, we're seeing some fundamental changes or preferences emerging among different kinds of households for something a little different than the past. Now, this is a very busy chart. This is generated by the National Association of Realtors in the 2013 American Preference or American Community Survey. To me, it says one very important thing, that increasingly households want quality communities. So if a household has can walk to work or shopping, can have a short commute to work, they're willing to live in or rent or buy attached housing products, apartments or townhouses or condos and such. On the whole, about 40% of Americans say that if they had the right mix of land uses and opportunities, they would choose an attached product to live in versus something else. For two-person households without children, that's about the same. For single-person households, it's about half of the single-person households would choose that opportunity over alternatives if the opportunity was available. Well, I'll tell you what, only half of the people who say they want this opportunity have the opportunity to live in those products, the attached products, whether they own or they rent, in communities that are quality communities, close to work, close to shopping, short commutes, and so forth. If we were to meet the market demand for these communities, for these households, now mind you, most people don't want to live in these communities. 40% do, 60% don't. But of the 40% that do, only 20% can. If we were to generate housing to meet the demand for the 40% of the population that wants that opportunity, we could put all new housing in attached modes in quality locations with transit accessibility between now and 2050, and we'd never meet the full demand. Now, how do we do that if we did that? How do we create or recreate these kind of communities? We don't build them in the forest or the farms. That's not where the people really want to go. Those 40% want to go anyway. They want to be in the urban fabric. Well, where do we do that? We do that on the parking lots of existing strip commercial centers, aging low FAR, floor area ratio office structures, and so forth. This diagram here shows dead or dying, commercial centers. If you added up the parking lots of all of the privately owned non-residential structures in the U.S., properties in the U.S., the total land area would be equivalent to, probably actually more than, the state of New Jersey, which is called the Garden State. This is the opportunity we have, and I see driving on the metropolitan Portland area here, it's actually taking place. The redevelopment of the parking lots up and down boulevards across metropolitan Portland, across the country, that's the next new housing opportunity. We need to figure out how to get that right. And with that, I want to give pause again to our friends in this house. Thank you.